The studio pulsed with a volatile energy, its glossy set bathed in lights that sharpened the brewing conflict. Jimmy Kimmel lounged behind his desk, his grin sly, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a host who thrived on pushing limits. Across from him, Robert De Niro sat, his posture taut, his face a storm of hard lines and barely restrained fire. The audience, packed tight, hummed with anticipation, expecting a lively chat about De Niro's latest film or his legendary roles. Instead, they were about to witness a confrontation that would tear through the veneer of late-night civility. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice laced with mock curiosity. "So, Bob, you've played every tough guy from Taxi Driver to The Godfather. But off-screen, you're not exactly Mr. Sunshine. What's with the intensity? You ever just relax?" The question was a barb, cloaked in humor, and the audience chuckled, expecting De Niro to shrug it off with his gruff charisma. But his eyes flashed, his jaw tightening, the air around him crackling with defiance. "I don't relax when there's work to do," De Niro said, his voice low, sharp, each word deliberate. "And I don't play nice for people like you, Jimmy, who think a smirk and a microphone make you some kind of judge." The retort was a spark, igniting the studio's polished facade. The crowd gasped, then erupted in a mix of cheers and nervous laughter. Kimmel's grin wavered, his eyes narrowing, caught off guard by the raw edge in De Niro's tone. "Whoa, we're getting spicy already," Kimmel said, recovering with a forced laugh, his voice tinged with irritation. "Come on, Bob. It's a talk show, not a street fight. You're acting like I've got you in the hot seat. What's got you so wound up? Bad coffee backstage?" The jab was sharper, poking at De Niro's reputation for passion, and the audience oohed, feeding off. The rising tension. De Niro's hands gripped the armrests, his gaze piercing, a storm gathering in his silence. De Niro hadn't wanted to be here. His team had pushed for the appearance to promote his new project, but he'd heard about Kimmel's habit of turning interviews into viral traps, baiting guests for clicks. De Niro, a man who channeled his fire into art and activism, despised the idea of being reduced to a punchline. Now, Kimmel's smug prodding was confirming his worst suspicions. And he wasn't about to let the host toy with him. "You want to know what's got me wound up?" De Niro said, leaning forward, his voice a controlled blaze. "It's you, Jimmy, sitting there, poking at people who actually stand for something, while you chase laughs and ratings. You're not digging for truth, you're digging for dirt." The audience roared, some clapping, others shouting, the energy raw and chaotic. Kimmel's face flushed, his composure cracking, unaccustomed to such a direct assault. "Digging for dirt?" Kimmel shot back, his voice rising, his charm slipping. "I'm doing my job, Bob. You're an actor, not a saint. You come in here, guns blazing like you're above a little fun. What's your deal? Afraid I'll expose the real you?" The accusation was a low blow, questioning De Niro's authenticity, and the crowd gasped, the tension thick. De Niro stood, his chair scraping, his presence commanding, his voice a growl. "Expose me?" he said, stepping closer, his eyes burning. "I've been real my whole life, kid. I fight for what matters, on screen and off, while you're out here playing court jester for clicks. That's the real sham." The words were a thunderclap, and the audience exploded, some chanting De Niro's name, others jeering. The producer signaled frantically for a commercial break, but Kimmel ignored. It too caught in the heat. "Court jester?" Kimmel snapped, standing, his hands slamming the desk. "This is my show, Bob, and you don't get to lecture me in my own house. You want to throw punches? Fine, but you're not running this stage." The hostility was raw, a line crossed in front of millions. De Niro's eyes narrowed, his silence a blade, promising a battle far from over as the show cut to black, the audience's screams echoing. The commercial break was a fleeting pause, the studio still thrumming with the aftershock of Robert De Niro's clash with Jimmy Kimmel. Backstage, The air was a tangle of urgency and disbelief, crew members whispering as social media ignited. With clips of the showdown, De Niro's Kimmel trending worldwide. De Niro stood in the green room, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face a mask of simmering fury. Kimmel's smug jabs, his dismissal of De Niro's principles, had struck a nerve, deeper than he'd expected. This wasn't about fame. It was about respect, something De Niro had fought for through decades of art and activism, and he wasn't about to let a talk show host cheapen it. Across the hall, Kimmel paced, his tie loosened, his face flushed with a mix of anger and unease. De Niro's unrelenting fire had thrown him off, and the audience's divided roars stung, a reminder that he was losing control of his own stage. The stage manager approached De Niro, her voice cautious. "They're ready to go back. You still in, or you done?" De Niro's eyes flicked to her, his jaw tight. He could walk away, let Kimmel spin the narrative, paint him as the volatile star who couldn't handle a jab. But that wasn't his way. "I'm in," he said, his voice low, resolute. The manager nodded, darting off. Kimmel, meanwhile, brushed off his producer's pleas to de-escalate. "He wants a war. He's got one," he muttered, straightening his jacket, his grin, masking the sting of De Niro's words. As the show resumed, the audience's roar was seismic, a mix of allegiance and anticipation. Kimmel retook his seat, his smile strained, his eyes locked on De Niro, who strode out with a deliberate intensity, his presence heavy, unyielding. The applause was chaotic, split between those cheering De Niro's raw passion and those rallying behind Kimmel's wit. Kimmel leaned forward, his tone sharp, barely masking his irritation. "All right, Bob, you came out swinging before the break. You've got my stage in a frenzy. Want to dial it back, or are you here to burn it all down?" The question was a trap, daring De Niro to escalate, but the actor's eyes burned, unflinching. "I don't dial back when someone's full of it, Jimmy," De Niro said, his voice a low growl, each word measured. "You want to talk frenzy? You started it, poking at me like I'm some prop for your show. I'm here for truth, not your circus." The audience erupted, some chanting his name, others booing, the energy raw and electric. Kimmel's face twitched, his charm cracking. De Niro's words slicing through his carefully crafted persona. "Truth?" Kimmel shot back, his voice rising, his hands gesturing sharply. "You're not out here saving the world, Bob. You're selling movies, same as anyone. You come in here, acting like I'm the bad guy for doing my job. Why so high and mighty? What's really eating you?" The jab was personal, questioning De Niro's motives, and the crowd gasped, then roared, some cheering, others jeering. The divide stark. De Niro leaned forward, his hands clenched, his voice steady but laced with steel. "Eating me?" De Niro said, his eyes blazing. "It's you, Jimmy, sitting there, turning people's lives into your little game. I've fought for things you wouldn't touch, causes you'd never understand, while you're out here chasing applause. You don't get to mock that." The words were a blade, cutting through Kimmel's bravado, and the audience went wild, some clapping, others shouting. The room a cauldron of emotion. Kimmel stood, his composure slipping, his hands gripping the desk, his anger raw. "Mock you?" Kimmel snapped, his voice trembling with fury. "I'm not mocking you, Bob. I'm calling you out. You think you're above this because you've got Oscars? This is my world and you're just a guest. You don't get to rewrite the rules." The threat was venomous, a line crossed, and the crowd was on its feet, the energy chaotic. De Niro rose, his presence towering, his voice low, dangerous. "Your world?" De Niro said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on Kimmel's. "You don't own this, Jimmy. You borrow it, same as me. But I'm not here to play your fool, and I'm not backing down." The audience roared, the sound deafening, as the two men stood inches apart, the tension a living pulse. The producer signaled frantically, but Kimmel ignored it, too consumed. By the moment, De Niro's silence was a promise of a fight far from over, as the show cut to another break, the chaos lingering like a storm cloud. The studio was a furnace, the commercial break doing little to quell the blaze between Robert De Niro and Jimmy Kimmel. Backstage, the atmosphere was a chaotic swirl of hushed debates and nervous glances, the crew grappling with the fallout as De Niro vs. Kimmel dominated every corner of the internet. De Niro leaned against a wall in the green room, his arms crossed, his eyes burning with a fire that hadn't dimmed. Kimmel's relentless prodding, his dismissal of De Niro's convictions, had pushed him to a place beyond anger, a fierce resolve to expose the hollowness beneath the host's charm. In his dressing room, Kimmel sat, his hands clenched, his face a mix of fury and doubt. De Niro's unyielding passion had stripped away his usual control, and the audience's divided roars echoed in his mind, a stark reminder that this was no longer just a show, it was a reckoning. The executive producer cornered Kimmel, her voice sharp. "Jimmy, you're losing the room. Pull it back, or this tanks." Kimmel's eyes flashed, his jaw tight. "He doesn't get to come in here and run me over," he said, his voice low, defiant. De Niro, meanwhile, ignored his publicist's pleas to soften his approach. "I'm not here to make friends," he growled, heading back to the stage. The audience, restless and ravenous, sensed the storm's peak approaching, their energy a living force as the lights snapped on. The show resumed, and the crowd's roar was a tidal wave, split between De Niro's loyalists and Kimmel's defenders. Kimmel sat, his smile gone, his eyes locked on De Niro, who strode out with a grim intensity, his presence a challenge. The applause was chaotic, a mix of awe and agitation. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice tight, edged with strain. "All right, Bob, you've turned my stage into a battlefield. You say I'm chasing laughs, not truth. So enlighten us. What's the truth you're so mad I'm missing?" The question was a dare, a chance for De Niro to back off or double down. De Niro sat, his eyes blazing, his voice low, cutting. "The truth, Jimmy? It's that you're not just joking. You're tearing people down to stay on top. You mock what matters, what people fight for, because it's easier than facing it. I'm mad because I've spent my life standing up for something, and you're out here making it a punchline." The audience erupted, some chanting his name, others booing, the room a crucible of emotion. Kimmel's face reddened, his hands trembling, De Niro's words exposing the fragility of his role. "Tearing people down?" Kimmel snapped, standing, his voice raw, trembling. "I'm doing my job, Bob, keeping this show alive, making people laugh in a world that's falling apart. You think you're special because you're out there shouting about causes? You're just another voice, yelling louder than most." The attack was vicious, dismissing De Niro's activism, and the crowd gasped, then roared, the divide stark. De Niro rose, his presence towering, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fury that silenced the room. "Just another voice?" De Niro said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on Kimmel's. "I've put my name, my work, my life on the line for what I believe. You hide behind your desk, throwing darts at people who actually take risks. You don't get to call that a job." The words were a thunderbolt, a defense of a life lived with purpose, and the audience was on its feet, the sound overwhelming, some weeping, others cheering. Kimmel's eyes flashed, his control slipping, De Niro's truth hitting harder than any insult. "You think you're untouchable?" Kimmel shot back, his voice cracking, desperate. "You're a myth, Bob, a guy we love because you're tough, not because you're right. I'm real, out here every night taking the hits. You don't get to judge me when you're just playing a part." The accusation was a last stand, a bid to flip the narrative, and the crowd gasped, the air thick with tension. De Niro's jaw tightened, his silence heavy, a warning of the fire about to break. De Niro stepped closer, his voice low, lethal. "Playing a part? I'm not playing, Jimmy. I'm standing here showing you who I am." You want to talk real? Look at yourself and tell me you're not the one hiding. The challenge was a spark, igniting the room, the audience screaming, the tension a tangible force. The producer signaled another break, but the clash hung unresolved, a promise of a showdown that would test them both to their core. The studio was a pressure cooker, the commercial break offering no relief from the searing tension between Robert De Niro and Jimmy Kimmel. Backstage, the crew was a whirlwind of frantic whispers and nervous glances, the weight of the clash sinking in as De Niro's Kimmel fueled a global firestorm online. De Niro stood in the shadows, his hands clenched, his eyes alight with a resolve that unnerved even his team. Kimmel's desperate attacks, his refusal to acknowledge the cost of his provocations, had pushed De Niro to a place of fierce clarity. He wasn't just defending himself, but every cause and person he'd fought for. In his dressing room, Kimmel leaned against the wall, his face pale, his hands shaking. De Niro's relentless truth had exposed the cracks in his carefully built persona, and the audience's divided energy haunted him, a reminder that his stage was slipping from his grasp. The producer approached Kimmel, her voice urgent. "Jimmy, you're on the edge. Reel it in, or we're done." Kimmel's eyes blazed, his voice low. "He doesn't get to make me the villain," he said, resolute. De Niro, meanwhile, brushed off his publicist's pleas to ease up. "I'm not here to coddle him," he growled, striding back to the stage. The audience, a restless sea of anticipation, sensed the storm's climax nearing, their energy a living pulse as the lights flared back to life. The show resumed, and the crowd's roar was deafening, split between De Niro's fierce supporters and Kimmel's loyalists. Kimmel sat, his smile absent, his eyes locked on De Niro, who walked out with a steely determination, his presence a force of nature. The applause was chaotic, a mix of awe and unrest. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice strained, raw. "Bob, you've called me out, turned my show upside down. You say I'm hiding, not facing truth. So what's your endgame? You want to burn this place down, or is there something else?" The question was a plea wrapped in defiance, a last bid to regain control. De Niro sat, his eyes burning, his voice low, resonant. "My endgame, Jimmy? It's simple. Stop using your stage to tear people apart. You've got power, a voice, a chance to do good, but you waste it on cheap shots. I'm not burning anything. I'm holding you to account." The audience erupted, some chanting his name, others shouting, the room alive with emotion. Kimmel's face twitched, his hands trembling. De Niro's words a mirror he couldn't escape. "Account?" Kimmel snapped, standing, his voice cracking with anger. "You think you're my judge, Bob? I'm out here every night, keeping this show alive, giving people a break from the mess out there. You're not saving anyone, you're just shouting. Louder than the rest of us." The attack was desperate, a dismissal of De Niro's purpose, and the crowd gasped, then roared, the divide stark. De Niro rose, his presence towering, his voice steady but laced with a sorrowful fury that hushed the room. "Shouting?" De Niro said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on Kimmel's. "I'm speaking, Jimmy, for people you'll never know, for fights you'll never join. I've put my heart into this world, while you're out here playing games with it. You don't get to call that nothing." The words were a tidal wave, a testament to a life of conviction, and the audience was on its feet, the sound overwhelming, some weeping, others cheering. Kimmel's hands shook, his control fraying. De Niro's truth a blow he couldn't counter. "You think you're the only one who cares?" Kimmel shot back, his voice hoarse, raw. "I'm not your enemy, Bob. I'm just a guy trying to do my job, to keep people watching, to matter. You come in here, acting like I'm the problem, but you're not seeing me." The admission was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of vulnerability, and the crowd quieted, caught by his humanity. De Niro's eyes softened, but his voice held firm, cutting through the haze. "I see you, Jimmy," De Niro said, his tone quieter but piercing. "I see the guy who could be more than a jester, who could use his voice to lift, not wound. But you're choosing this, and it's hurting more than you know." The audience roared, the sound a mix of tears and cheers, as Kimmel's eyes glistened, De Niro's words forcing him to confront his impact. The tension was electric, a promise of a resolution that would redefine them both. As the producer signaled the final break, the stage set for a climactic close. The final commercial break was a fleeting pause, the studio still vibrating with the raw intensity of Robert De Niro's clash with Jimmy Kimmel. Backstage, the air was heavy with the weight of what had unfolded. De Niro stood alone, his hands unclenched, his eyes distant but resolute. He'd come to defend his truth, but Kimmel's glimpse of vulnerability had shifted something. A recognition that this wasn't just a fight, but a chance to bridge a divide. In his dressing room, Kimmel sat, his head bowed, his hands steadying. As De Niro's words echoed, a call to be more than a jester. The audience's roars, the internet's frenzy, all faded against the realization that he'd been seen, not as a villain, but as a man capable of change. The crew moved silently, sensing the historic moment, as the stage manager called them back for the final act. The lights flared, and the audience's roar was a tidal wave, a mix of awe and hunger for resolution. De Niro walked out first, his stride steady, his face carrying a quiet strength, no longer just fury but purpose. Kimmel followed, his smile absent, his eyes meeting De Niro's with a flicker of respect, though his guard lingered. The applause was deafening, but it carried a plea for closure, not chaos. Kimmel sat, his voice quieter, raw. "Bob, we've torn into each other tonight. You've called me out, and I've felt it. So let's end this reel. What do we do with this fire?" The question was unguarded, a surrender of his usual bravado, and the crowd hushed, sensing a turning point. De Niro leaned forward, his eyes steady, his voice low, resonant. "We use it, Jimmy. You've got a stage, a voice, a chance to do more than just make noise. Stop wounding, start building. That's what I'm fighting for, not against you but for something bigger." The words were a bridge, not a blade, and the audience erupted, some cheering, others weeping, moved by De Niro's blend of fire and hope. Kimmel's face softened, his hands unclenching, the weight of De Niro's truth sinking in. "You think, I don't want that?" Kimmel said, his voice cracking, vulnerable. "I'm out here every night trying to connect, to make people laugh, to matter. But you're right, Bob. I've leaned too hard on the easy shots. I'm not perfect, but I'm listening." The admission was seismic, a man owning his flaws in front of millions, and the crowd roared, some nodding, others murmuring support. De Niro's eyes flickered with understanding, his voice softening, but firm. "Listening's the start, Jimmy," De Niro said, his tone warm, resolute. "You don't have to be perfect, but you've got to try. Use your heart, your mic, to lift people up. That's how we fight the real fight. Together." The crowd was on its feet, the sound a mix of tears and cheers. As Kimmel's eyes glistened, De Niro's words a call he couldn't ignore. For a moment the studio felt small, the conflict dissolving into a shared reckoning. Kimmel nodded, a faint smile breaking through, his voice hoarse. "I hear you, Bob. I'm not done screwing up, but I'm done hiding. Thanks for the wake-up." He extended a hand, a gesture of truce, not defeat. De Niro took it, his grip firm, his face easing into a rare, genuine nod. "Keep waking up, Jimmy," he said, his voice steady, "and I'll keep watching." The audience roared, some chanting their names, the divide healed by a shared truth. De Niro stood, facing the crowd, his presence commanding but human. "This is what matters," he said, his voice rising, resonant. "Not the fight, but what we do with it. Stand for something, and don't back down." The crowd cheered, a celebration of conviction, not conquest. Kimmel joined him, his smile real, his eyes clear. "Thanks for the fight, Bob," he said, his voice firm. "And for the truth." As the cameras panned out, the music swelled, and the lights dimmed. The story closed, not with a storm, but with a triumph. De Niro and Kimmel stood together, not as foes, but as men who'd faced their truths and chosen to rise. The audience's cheers carried a promise of purpose, of growth, of a victory rooted in heart, leaving them moved, united, and ready to carry the fire forward.